Welcome back to the table. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Artisans of Splendent Vale. And if you haven't heard about this game, first of all, I'm surprised because this is a big game coming from Renegade Game Studios. It's a 2 to 4 player legacy adventure game that does a ton of different things. You've got action sequences. You've got kind of a shared narrative where everyone's going to have their own book in a sort of choose your own adventure style experience. And it pulls all those things together in a way that I have not seen yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in this game, but we're kind of going to bring it all together. And the way we're going to do that is to talk about these characters. The game is very much focused on these characters. And like the title implies, it's called Artisans. These are not your standard adventuring characters. You don't have your warrior, your rogue, your mage. I mean, you have artificer, your apothecary, tailor, even a mason.
Yeah.
So these are not characters that are out there adventuring for money. These are characters that are trying to improve the lives of their Vale, and they're getting embroiled in adventures as you go. And these character books kind of serve as the focal point for everything your character does during the game. This was designed by Nikki Valens, a name that you might recognize from Legacy of Dragonholt, which was another solo adventure game. This one takes that similar premise of giving you a book with a lot of different entries in it that tells a narrative, but splits it up over 4 possible characters, which I've never really seen before.
Yeah, it's almost like if you think of a single-player experience being a choose your own adventure, this is almost like a table reading if you're doing a play or something, because the role-playing comes out through these characters that you're portraying, for sure. And it's nice because I think some people at the table who might be less into role-playing in a natural way can kind of use this not only as their prompt, but you're literally just reading it. It allows a lot of players, I think, to get a little bit more into character. And these characters really do come through in here. This is not just the adventure that unfolds in this game, but you learn a lot about these characters too, and their backstory and their life and how they come together and things like that. This all starts with a personal setup. Everyone is going to pick a character at the beginning of the game, and you open it up. And this is meant to be read aloud and shared with the other players at the table so they can understand not only who you are as a player, but who you're playing. So for example, my personal setup says I start the campaign with Slingshot. And I'm going to just share this experience with you in this video. You'll go into this box right here and you'll look for that card, the Slingshot card, and they're all numbered. You'll pull that out and add it to your character. This box here contains, and this is just a demo kit, by the way. We should make this very clear. This is a prototype, and it doesn't have near the amount of content that the final game will have.
Right.
But with that said, there's a ton of cards in here, and you're going to sort of get yourself set up. And then it also tells you to bring out these interlude cards. Every character is going to have a number of interlude cards. You're going to shuffle some of them up and then put one on top. These are cards that are going to sort of act as the intermission, if you will, between the scenarios that you're going to play. Yeah. Once you've gotten all of this set up with your book, with your character sheet, which Ryan's going to talk about a little bit more in a second, you're ready to play and jump right into the narrative.
Yeah, and that narrative changes a lot. David alluded to this, but a lot of this storybook is read aloud, and you'll have other characters that may or may not be in your particular game that have speaking lines. And based on the composition of your party, you're going to be going in different directions because certain characters have their own backstories, their own plots, their own narratives. They're intertwining throughout the game. So whether you play this game with 2 characters or 4 or anywhere in between, you're going to have a story that's focused directly on the characters that are present. You're not going to see references and things to characters that aren't in the game. But that being said, each of these characters gets a cool little box that's going to contain all of the stuff that you gain for them over the course of the game. Because like any good legacy game, you're going to be unlocking new things. You're going to be able to build and upgrade your character over time. You're going to get tokens and stickers and cards and
stickers for
tons
sure
of stuff that are going to make your character very unique. All of that is kind of tracked through that character sheet. This seems like a pretty standard character sheet. You've got information on the front for your basic character information, and on the back you have your player aid, which tells you all your actions that can be upgraded. But where this game really shines, I think, is the middle of this book. Like, notice already how absolutely different the inside of my book looks to the one that David is holding. Each of these characters have completely different asymmetric abilities. They can do different things. I mean, this guy's an artificer. So my whole goal here is to collect various resources over the course of the game which I can store on my player sheet, and then I could use those to craft specific items, which is completely unique. That whole crafting system is unique to this character.
Yeah, and I have the Apothecary information here, which is basically a little shelving unit where I'm going to have all of my potions. I'm going to be the one who's making all these potions in the game. So there are going to be certain things that we find in the game that are going to be more useful and probably tracked on my inventory versus Ryan's, for example. And some of the others that we haven't even shown you work also completely differently. This one in particular, I have to show this one. You've got these sort of glyphs that you're going to, you start with some of these runes and then throughout the game. And I can tell you in the first couple scenarios that we played, there was a situation where if you're playing this character, you're able to utilize your skills and discover another rune. And that's going to have lasting impact throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, and you're actually like drawing the rune in the book and you're naming the rune.
And naming the rune.
It's very cool. So that is all kind of like what's going on with your character, but that's not all. Like the world itself is changing and growing as you make decisions and as you play through action scenes. Eventually, your decisions can lead to one of two potential outcomes. Either you'll have just a story that's narrative driven, or you'll have some kind of action scene. And these are going to be played out on this board, which is actually kind of like a storybook. It'll have you flip to a specific entry. It's going to tell you how to set it up. It's going to tell you how to position your characters, who's involved in this particular battle, which may or may not actually be like a fight.
Yeah.
It could be any kind of special encounter. But there is still fighting in this game. I mean, I want to stress that. Like, these characters are artisans, but they're going to be put in these combat situations, and you do have a lot of cool combat abilities and things like that, because the actual like dungeon crawl element of the game, if you want to call it that, that's put out on these boards is a very thinky strategy game, actually.
Yeah, and these action scenes are incredibly deterministic, which we'll get into when we discuss how it works. But the other thing that's going on here is it's got a very RPG, video game RPG feel to it.
It does, for
You're
sure.
running through an initiative order just like you would in a lot of RPGs. And the way that you actually execute the AI, for lack of a better way of putting it, for the enemies is very interesting because there's a little bit of randomness to it, but then also some things that are very systemic that you can kind of plan for, determine, based on what might happen before they attack.
You know what they can do. You just don't know exactly which one of the options they're going to do.
Yeah, and some of them can be, you might even be hoping for an enemy like, oh, I hope they do this thing this time,
Right.
because that will give us some time, and you can plan for those things. But the deterministic part of this action scene is how the dice work in this game. And I hesitate to even call them dice.
To use the term deterministic and dice in the same sentence, right?
Exactly. But at the beginning of an action scene, you're actually going to roll up 8 of these dice into a pool. And you're going to hold these off to the side of the board. This is your action pool for your team, if you will, in this scene. And these give you a variety of different icons that are going to allow you to trigger effectively all the different abilities you have during your turn. At the beginning of your turn, you're going to roll 3 dice and add it to the pool, and then do one of 2 actions. And this can be moving, attacking, and of course, like for instance, I said earlier, I had this slingshot. That's going to give me the opportunity to do a unique type of attack. You're simply going to look for the matching icon, shoot for example, and remove a die from the pool in order to do that action. And then you'll execute that action, and these work in a range of different ways, but in this case, I'm going to attack for 2, so I know I'm doing 2 damage.
Right.
That's the deterministic part. But it's going to be plus 1 die. You're going to take that 1 die and roll that up, and if you get the matching symbol again, in this case, this sort of action symbol, or a wild symbol, I'm going to be able to add to that. So it's going to add another crit to that. So I would get 2 plus 1 in this instance, doing 3 damage. So I'd like to say it's kind of deterministic plus.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. These are definitely resources that need to be managed as well, because this dice pool is cooperative for your entire group.
Yeah.
So if you're spending these dice, that means somebody else isn't. And when you're looking at all of your actions, of course, you see your basic actions here, but like David said, cards, and you might have stickers, you might have some other abilities. And some of these abilities can be boosted by spending either wilds or these plus symbols. So potentially you could be using a lot of dice on your turn. But you're setting up for some big moves. I mean, when you're boosting specific actions, like your attacks can do more damage, your movement can let you move a little bit farther. you have to determine whether or not it's better for you to use that or maybe for another character, based especially on where you're going to be laying on that initiative.
Yeah, and in fact, you could actually spend some of your turn to ready a die. So if there are die out here that Ryan's not really going to be able to use to do exactly what he's wanting to do on his turn, we can discuss that, and I would say, okay, I'll use my second action to add a die to the pool, and that's called readying it, and I can put the exact face that we need in there so that Ryan has one of those to use. One thing that I learned in the scenarios that we played, too, is if you don't have any shields in here, you're never going to be able to defend.
Right.
And defending is a reaction, which is another cool thing, because on any of the enemy's turns and in even another player's turn, you have a number of reactions. And everyone starts, I believe, with defend as that reaction, and it uses the shield. So for instance, if an enemy is attacking me on their turn in the initiative order, and there's a shield here, they'll resolve their attack. I know what kind of damage is coming my way, and then I can choose, you know what, I'm going to react and use this shield, reducing the dice in our pool, and then resolving my defense. So I might be able to block some of that. But if we don't have any shields or wilds in this pool, then we're going to be taking a beating if the enemies are dishing out the attacks.
Yeah, and I like that a lot about this. I like that you're never missing. You're never setting up a big turn and missing. You might be doing a little less damage than you wanted. When you're rolling a die, it's like plus or minus 1 damage. Like, oh, you didn't get that 1 extra.
Exactly.
It is possible for the enemies to defend. They can have shields added to them to protect them. But again, because of this initiative order, there's a whole timing element. Because what's super interesting about this game that I think it does very differently is that you might have several different types of enemies, and they're all kind of listed at the bottom of that page. But each group of enemies is treated as one single entity. So when you're doing damage to those groups, to any member of that group, the damage is done to the whole group, which is kind of a crazy concept to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it is really unique. In fact, I've seen some games where a group or a mob has X number of health, say 20. In this case, they don't have a cumulative health. They each have, like, say, 6 hit points in this case. But you're tracking the damage you're doing to them as a group. So for instance, if there are 2 of the same type of figure on the map and I do 4 damage against one that has 6 hit points, and then Ryan on his turn does 4 damage to a different one on his turn, that 4 plus 4 goes up to 8. So it takes out one of them, the one that Ryan targeted, and on top of that, there's 2 damage left over in that one instance, and that 2 damage stays on this dial so that basically the one that's left over is still sort of staggering from the damage we had done to them.
It's an interesting concept, but it's thematic in the idea that, sure, they have 6 health points, but that doesn't mean that everyone is the same.
Exactly.
Some might actually get knocked out from 2 hits. Some might take a whole 6. And I think that represents that idea that, like, you're fighting a group of enemies, right? Some of them are faster and stronger than others. And so you can kind of manipulate this if there's somebody that's getting ready to take their action. Maybe we attack somebody else to make them a little weaker. So
exactly.
You can come in and do the finishing blow. All of this, like, timing and planning and strategy is not what I expected from this narrative game. But I'm glad it exists because it gives you a lot of, like, meat for, like, really thinky combat situations in between all the narrative stuff you're doing in the book.
Yeah, I think the theme of having some deterministic aspects plus a little bit of chance is throughout the threads of this entire game, because even how the enemies work and their AI works, what you're going to do is take one of the available die outside of your pool, not from your die pool. And when, say, an arbalist is activating, you're going to roll a die and then look for that symbol down the left-hand side of the column on the arbalist. In this case, we'd be triggering the weapon jam.
Oh, no
lucky
effect.
us. No effect.
That never happened during the actual scenario.
No, we never did have the weapon jam when we played. But you're going to start there and then trigger specifically top to bottom the sort of guidance that's listed under, say, reposition or take aim. So in some of these cases, it can be nothing. And in fact, even in the boss's case, they did something like Marshall, which doesn't do any attacks, but it created a bunch of status effects for them and nearby allies. The status effects are kind of interesting too, because they'll go out there, and if an enemy or a mob has a certain status effect, they might have multiple tokens of that same status effect. That doesn't increase the strength of that effect. So if a status effect gives them 1 extra damage, and they have 3 of those, they're not doing 3 extra damage. It just means that effect is going to last longer, because at the end of their activation, you're going to remove one of those status tokens. So if there's 3, he's going to take 3 turns with that status effect.
Yeah, and that is all, like David said, controlled by the AI, but also there's kind of an AI for the way that the encounter is going to play out, and that's listed on the side as well.
Yeah.
Because it's going to tell you on specific turns after you've maybe played a turn or two, it's going to have you go back to the book. It might change up the gameplay, bring in more enemies, or it might end the combat. You don't necessarily know when the combat is going to end. There's a goal that you have to achieve that's listed in the action scene, but there also might be something that you flip to that
changes it
up, and it brings out new cards, changes the whole scenario, which is super interesting as well.
Yeah, we want to be careful not to ruin anything.
I'm trying to say things without giving spoilers, but all of this information can change. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I will say specifically, there was a scenario we played where one of the mobs listed below was one way, and then at a certain point it was triggered. We got a card out of this delightful box full of cards, and it actually laid over top of that, effectively evolving that mob so that now they had maybe a weapon, or they were going to act and behave a little bit differently. It's that sort of reveal that happens all throughout this game, and wait till we get going, because this is just the action scene. There's so much more that happens inside this book during the narrative elements.
Yeah, that's true.
Some of which can happen at the end of an action scene. Maybe you've cleared an area and there's a tent or something that you can go investigate. Then you go and investigate that, and it's going to lead you to potentially maps inside this book. And as a group, you're going to be all looking at your own map in your book. Now, and a lot of those numbers are the same in all your books, but some characters might be better or more observant, and they might see something over in the corner of this room, and Ryan might have a number on his map that I don't have on my map. So he's like, I have a 17 up here, and I'm like, well, I don't have 17. And he's like, well, do you? So then we look, and we're like, do we want to investigate? Then we'll go to entry 17. I might not have an entry 17 because his character might have something going on that allows him to pursue that a little bit better. And it creates this situation where even if you're not the one doing something, when you hear someone at the table say, oh, wait, I have this, and you're like, wait, what? And you're like trying to figure out.
I found something.
Exactly. It's just like you're all sitting in this area searching it for things. And we've seen some scenarios, even in those maps, that played out wildly different. Because you might find a loose stone, for example, and we might be able to force it and move it. Or if you're playing with a certain character, you might be able to do something totally different, and you probably will get the same result ultimately, but the route there opened up some other things for that character specifically that were very unique.
Well, I think that's worth mentioning too, because we'll talk about how every book has different entries and every character can see different things. If you see something that's specific to your character that no one else can see, it's going to improve your character. It's going to be part of your character's story or narrative.
As far as we know.
As far as we know, because
Probably
there's no penalty to not using all 4 characters. The game will play out with whatever character set you play with. And you need to have at least 2 players because a lot of these characters will interact with each other. There's a lot of things that suggest maybe you need another character to come with you to do something. Again, I don't want to spoil, but these interlude cards are going to be drawn, and these are just like additional story elements that are going to happen when you're told to draw your interlude cards, which is typically
at the end of the day.
Day. And that's, I think, a concept that's worth talking about briefly. You're going to be going back and forth from the narrative in this book to those puzzle maps to this adventure until something tells you that the day is over.
Right.
Technically, that's kind of like the end of a session, right? Because this isn't like a traditional board game. You can play as long as you want. You can play as many days as you want.
You could even finish. You could pause in the middle of a day.
Exactly. But a day is like the ending segment. That's when you're going to like refresh everything. You're going to flip over these cards. You're going to get a chance to maybe craft some items from your book or whatever. I craft items.
Yeah,
and
you'll usually heal up to some degree, but effectively it's sort of the wrap up. It won't spoil much, but after the first session that we had played, we all kind of effectively went home to our own individual lives and experienced some things there. And I will tell you, without showing you, these 2 characters in particular, and we don't know about these other 2, walked away with a new item or a new trait or a new skill. These are going to be cards that you're going to be able to populate around your player sheet. And when you go into these action scenes, ultimately, you're going to be selecting from a few of these because you can't go in with unlimited weapons and unlimited skills. You actually have to limit those to just a few. So It's a very interesting narrative experience with an incredible amount of reveals. And we don't. This is a preview, but I have to say I've never played anything quite like this personally, and I'm looking forward to really digging into the entire campaign.
Yeah, I can't say that I have either. I mean, I've seen games that use like books that have like choose your own adventure style.
I've seen
I've seen
group
games
ones
that do narrative like this.
Yep.
But I've never seen a game that has tied so many concepts together. I mean, we didn't even really talk about the world map that you're going to be exploring and you're going to be adding stickers to, and you're going to be naming locations, and like you're going to have a uniquely crafted story that is built for your table. And I think that this is going to be one of those games that if you play through it to the end, like you're going to remember that experience for sure.
Yeah, and this map unfolds in a way where I believe that you're going to create a to-do list. In fact, your player sheet literally has a to-do list. So as you play through the adventure, there are going to be things that present themselves that you can get to when you want to, effectively. And as the game unfolds, when a new day starts, you might be able to sort of try to get those things done and go to the locations that you may have ignored before, because there's a ton of choices through this game. And you're going to be making some of those individually, but most of them you're going to be making together.
Yeah, and if there's there's logbooks where you can record all your data. There's places for notes within your characters. There's check marks and things that you're going to be adding. I mean, there's just so much that makes this game feel alive. I think if you are looking for the next big narrative experience, this is probably going to be up your alley.
Especially if you want unique things. There are some aspects in this dice pool mechanic. Just with what little experience we've had with it right now, I want to see this used in a lot more games, because I didn't think it was going to be as tense as it ended up being.
Right.
Because after you play, even though you're adding 3 dice to the dice pool at the beginning of your turn, it does start to dwindle over time. And it also starts to dwindle with specific icons. And if you can't defend, you're going to take some damage. If you can't attack, you're not going to do that. So you really do have to try to start cooperating and taking one of your actions to maybe set up some dice so the other players can do what they need to do.
And so thank you so much for joining us as we took a look at Artisans of Splendent Vale. This game is going to be on crowdfunding, so you'll be able to take a look at the campaign, see what the final components are going to look like, see what they've teased. Maybe there's some hidden stuff that they're announcing. I don't even know, actually.
I'm sure the campaign is going to have a ton more detail than what we have right here. Again, this is just sort of a demo kit that they gave us, and this was enough to get us interested.
I'm ready to play more, honestly.
Absolutely. If you have any questions at all, though, please make them in the comments below, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.